Tommy, we had so much fun talking about all the players. We decided, why not? Let's do this again. So here we are. I can't turn down more opportunities to see and talk to you, my friend.
Yeah, happy to keep getting through this. Some of it's very mundane and you know nerdy law jargon and law maneuvers, but hopefully we can make this a little bit more understandable to the rest of your audience, the legal community, and also just the general public.
Well, I think it is hard to get through. And I'll single out myself, like I went to law school, I'm a practicing lawyer. I still have a hard time keeping up and following what this stuff really means. Like, unless you're someone like you with a background that's done these cases and done this kind of work, like it's not just intuitive to understand, and it's on such a large scale. And frankly, you don't know who to turn to trust for like the actual facts. Like you mentioned in the first episode we did, you go read up the stuff on yourself. You're not just relying on the press release or the footage from whatever cable TV news station you listen to. So that's a challenge too that people are facing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think it's unwieldy to say anybody in the general public can go read a 100-page indictment and understand what's going on with it. A lot of that indictment is redundant. Actually, I think it is kind of a more simple case than would require 100 pages. Hopefully, we explained some of that in the prior video about how it's really just these few categories of charges and categories of defendants.
So 98 pages, is that the sheer volume? Does that surprise you? Is that something that is just, and you just said it, you think it was probably too long, but just in and of itself, is that a huge number?
Oh yeah, no doubt. An indictment doesn't have to include much evidence at all in a typical case. It just has to lay out the essential elements of the crime and what in general evidence you intend to present to meet all those elements. In a RICO case, because the name of the game is, let's get the top of the pyramid, they do allege all of these acts in furtherance of the scheme. And in that indictment, Willis has laid out over 150 specific acts, subject herself to a good bit of ridicule from the media in the fact that some of them are very mundane acts. Donald Trump called this, Speaker of the Georgia House, and that's all it says. Donald Trump retweeted OAN News's post of the Georgia hearings. These things wouldn't be crimes, and they may not even be in furtherance of a conspiracy, but she did get very specific in the indictment to lay out at least the contacts that all of these players were making, and many of those specific acts in furtherance of the conspiracy are then repeated as the other 40 charges or whatever in this indictment. So the main charge, the one RICO charge, goes for 68 pages. The remaining 30 pages or so lays out those other 40 charges.
She seems kind of RICO happy. Is that a word, RICO happy? Her history has shown she bringing those charges, oftentimes. Is that a strategy that is unique to her, or is she just utilizing a statute that plays perfectly to what she's saying happened?
I think it's probably yes to both of those. Because she's had some success with it in the past in terms of bringing together a group of people to show an enterprise, a larger conspiracy, and to hold accountable the ones who may have not done the grunt work on it, but were the architects of the scheme. She said, I think she said something like, "I love Rico." So yeah, I think
said nobody ever.
I think Rico happy is a good way to describe it.
So what's interesting too is Rudy Giuliani, of course, made his name as the lead prosecutor in Manhattan in New York City. bringing these exact types of charges against the mafia. And I've seen some reports that the mafia folks are kind of they're kind of laughing right now. They're saying, "Hey, what goes around comes around." So that's a unique piece of this too, huh?
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, that's the just the rise and fall of Rudy on his own as a specific part of this. It could be he could have his own movie of where he's come full circle.
Well, in one of our chats, I think that maybe you said or someone else said that if he had just like never been seen again after September 11th, there'd be streets and roads and bridges named after America's mayor. Instead, he's had a pretty big fall from grace.
Yeah, I mean, not only this case, but he's in one of the Borat movies with Lady of the Night, and he has been sued by former employees for sexual harassment. He's been sued by some of his, vendors for his legal service for unpaid bills. Um, it's been reported that he's having a hard time finding a Georgia lawyer to represent him here because of how short on funds he is. So, he may end up being represented by the public defender. I don't know if that's true. I think he does have some real estate assets that he may have to sell to hire somebody. But yeah, I don't take any pleasure in it to see somebody fall from grace like that. But yeah, I remember he was almost the Republican candidate for president in 2008.
Yeah, it's wild. So going through the indictment, Trump listed number one, biggest fish, clearly. Giuliani, I mean, his name recognition, he's probably number two, but do you sense that there's a kind of focus on the bigger names here, or is it literally they're just one of 19 people that participated in this alleged, conspiracy?
I absolutely think that the focus is on Trump, and definitely Rudy underneath him. He was the face of the effort. He was the one who was holding the press conferences. He was the lead attorney in all the legislative hearings where he was not only in Georgia but also in these other states that are alleged. And we didn't mention the federal indictment in Washington D.C., but there's a lot of overlap here with that case. So Jack Smith, the special prosecutor's indictment of Trump in Washington, it also has this alternate elector scheme at the heart of it. There are, unindicted co-conspirator 1 through 6 in that case. Many of them are indicted co-conspirators in the Georgia case. So yes, I think you always want to get the head of the snake, as I said in the last.
The two names that I mean that all troubles me, but that I really kind of think through a lot are Jeffrey Clark and Mark Meadows, because these are folks that, as you mentioned, Mark Meadows, chief of staff, Jeffrey Clark, an acting, assistant attorney general. These are big time offices. Are they doing things in furtherance of the job that they think is the right thing to have done in the role they're in, or are they committing crimes, or is that what we're going to soon find out, see how it all plays out? Because that's what I have a hard time with.
Sure, and they are of the co-defendants in this case. They have some of the least amount of charges. Mark Meadows, his only other charge from the broad RICO charge is solicitation of violation of oath of office from the January 2nd call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, which certainly was highly publicized at the time, and we thought was going to be sort of the heart of this indictment. I think it's more of a ancillary charge now, as opposed to the fake elector scheme. But that's his only charge, and he has already moved to remove the case from Georgia State Court to federal court on the grounds, as you just mentioned, that he was just acting as called for by his office. He was, filling out the duties of White House chief of staff, putting the president in touch with people he wanted to be in touch with, and that is what likely is going to get it to federal court. That this federal constitutional defense of acting in as, what my oath of office was, what my duties were. States aren't allowed to get involved with that. It should only be in federal court.
So what's the procedure to have it removed from Fulton County to, a federal district court? And how does that affect the other 18?
Well, I'm not totally familiar with how it affects the other 18. I think David Schaefer at least has said publicly he believes that if any of the cases go federal, they all should go federal. As far as the mechanics of it, I think you probably are familiar in a civil case, you file a notice of removal, which initiates proceedings in the federal court. Right now, his case is assigned to Judge Steve Jones in the Northern District of Georgia.
He was a great judge, by the way.
Great judge. We've known him from our time in Athens when he was a state court judge there. Fantastic guy, fantastic judge. He's going to hold a hearing this coming Monday on Meadows's motion or notice of removal. I think the bar is pretty low. I don't think he has to show that he will succeed on this defense that he was just acting in his role as chief of staff. It just has to be colorable.
That's what I was going to ask you. You kind of touched on it, but what is the discretion that Judge Jones is going to have to accept the case? In a civil case, statute lays out, the requirements to make it have a federal question or diversity. If you remove it by right, is it going to be there, or does a judge have to take evidence and then say, yes, this meets the bar to have a federal case?
Well, it is a low bar, I think. Like I said, some legal scholars I've heard saying, "Oh, it's no doubt it's automatic." Others have said, "No, it's obvious he was not acting in his role as chief of staff because this was just furthering the campaign, not furthering any federal interest." So that Judge Jones would have the ability to send it back. I anticipate he's going to keep it in federal court for at least Meadows, Trump, and Clark.
So federal court, in my experience, moves much quicker than state court. I do think there could be a scenario where Judge Jones, if he accepts the case in the next however long, can just say, hey, look, you got 6 months, 4 months, 8 months, whatever it is, trial date set, let's go. So I guess I get two questions. Number one, do you think that is also true in federal court? And we're already seeing an example of motions being filed that's going to delay this 6-month timetable in state court, which makes it that much more unlikely that, Willis has a trial in March.
Right. So
unlikely.
Yeah. Right. So there are, possibilities that this could backfire on these federal defendants. If it is determined that only these 3 go to federal court, then yeah, the federal court certainly could get through motions of 3 sets of lawyers faster than 19 sets of lawyers. Their caseload is much smaller in federal court than in state court, particularly on the criminal side. And he can decide I'm going to prioritize this over anything else because Donald Trump is the front runner for the GOP nomination, and it could definitely move faster. But I do think there's going to be quite a bit of pre-trial appellate litigation. That doesn't happen a whole lot in civil cases, that they're able to appeal pre-trial rulings. Doesn't happen a whole lot in federal criminal court either, but so many of these things are unprecedented. I think you're going to see things go to the 11th Circuit and possibly the U.S. Supreme Court prior to trial.
Yeah, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. So the list of 19, do you have that where you can pull that back up, that chart you made?
I do.
You probably don't need it in front of you, but admittedly, I do. If you're prosecuting this case, put your prosecution hat on. Where do you kind of look at this list and say, if my goal is to get the folks at the top, cut off the head of the snake, as you said, who of these 19 do you kind of say, okay, this is somebody who I might be able to, I don't know, flip's the wrong word, but get them to enter into some sort of an agreement where I can utilize their testimony, utilize evidence from them to help my bigger goal? Where do you see those people fit in?
Well, unlike a mob case or drug dealing case where you sort of you catch one fish to get the next bigger fish to get the next bigger. I don't think that's necessarily the plan here. It's unusual for there to be lawyers uh, charged criminally for their actions. Arguably just acting as a lawyer. But a lot of these people, that's their livelihood, right? If they're convicted of any of these things, they're going to be disbarred. They're going to have to, find some other line of work. This guy Ken Chesborough, I've heard it said he's an interesting cat in this whole hierarchy. Up until I think 2016, he was, a known liberal. He was a mentee of Lawrence Tribe at Harvard. He was in school at the time with Jeffrey Toobin and Ron Klain, who's high up in the Biden administration as chief of staff. So for him to kind of totally change his colors and allegedly be the architect of this scheme to overturn the election, I don't know. He's I don't know him personally. I don't know anything about him other than what I can read in the indictment and news reports. But maybe he's somebody because of his, prior affinities for other political leanings. He might be somebody who would flip.
Yeah, no, that seems to make some sense. So, if you're to put on your prediction hat, which is an unfair question, but hey, that's what we do. Where's this thing go? Like, where does this end up? Um, I always understood that federal indictments, their conviction rate or their guilty plea rate is super high, like you did it type thing. Does the same kind of percentages hold true for this sort of indictment? So there's a lot of questions that I've been putting in there, but just how's this going to end?
Well, I think this case and relatedly the federal case in DC, you can't really put in a bucket with anything else and say, oh well, percentages wise, we've never seen anything like this. This attempt to present alternate slates of electors and to have Vice President Pence either choose to count the ones that were not certified by those states, the ones that went to Trump, or just disregard both of them. We've never seen that before. It's never been challenged in any way. So, this a large defense for that aspect of it is going to be the First Amendment, which most people think of, well, free speech. Well, it also includes a clause of the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, which John Eastman, who is one of the top lawyers here, the national legal team for Trump, that's what he's been screaming, that you're allowed to present legal arguments that the Constitution would allow this. It's not a crime to have a creative argument about what the Constitution allows. And so this case, not only is it what did these people do or what was in their mind, but is that even a crime? So this is going to be very difficult, very, very different from, a run of the mill criminal case.
How do you compare and contrast this with Gore v. Bush all those years back? Because I've heard a lot of people say, like, what's the difference, right? Like, this is someone who lost, who says the election was stolen and it was not counted, and I want to challenge it because my right is to make sure it was done correctly. What's the differences?
Sure. Well, we were seniors in college when that was happening.
Which is wild to think about, but it's hey, timeline don't lie.
Yeah. So I don't, the ins and outs of that. As I recall, it all focused on how many more recounts in Florida they were going to do, how they were supposed to count the hanging chads, the butterfly ballots, and the U.S. Supreme Court just said, no, you need to stop counting. And so that didn't involve Gore saying, there was fraud here. There was this election was rigged. It was all about, when are we going to count? What are we going to count? Here, this fake elector scheme is, we can't possibly imagine that enough people voted for Biden legitimately. So, giving these folks the benefit of the doubt, in their mind, I think and this is probably true for the Democrats too. They can't imagine that anyone would, in their right mind, vote for Donald Trump. But these folks are saying there has to be fraud here. We just haven't found it yet. And I think that's still, the polls say 70% of Republicans still believe that Biden was not legitimately elected, that the election was stolen, that we just haven't found the evidence. It's there, it's false, but we haven't found it. And so these people were trying to right a wrong, what they honestly believed in their heart. They were trying to correct the election because it was fraudulent. And so, they wanted to go to the extreme here. And what they actually did, I said they reserved this, private conference room, and they sort of had their electoral college meeting in secret, but it wasn't, under the table from that point. They filed everything. It was public. They filed their certificates not only in Congress, but also in federal court, like I said, to try to reserve their rights for further appeals or to present evidence that could be found in the future. So, that's sort of the thing is it really a crime, even though you signed a paper that said you were the duly elected elector? If in your mind you believe that that's true, that the duly submitted ballots elected me because there was fraud out there, even though I didn't find it, is that an actual forgery?
Right. So one thing that you briefly mentioned, but I want to just bring back up, because I think that at least from a headline standpoint, it can be something that people can grab onto because it's kind of easy to understand, is this phone call that Trump had with Secretary of State Raffensperger, saying essentially, I might be off by a little bit, but Trump lost by 11,000 votes and change in Georgia. And as I understand it, he basically said, go find me 12,000 votes. That just doesn't sound good. Again, I don't know the context. I don't know the phone call, but would you agree with me that just doesn't sound good?
Correct. I mean, obviously find me the votes, sounds like, you need to create them or just somehow make this happen when there's not evidence. In that call, more of the context of it, he was presenting a lot of the same numbers that are alleged as false. Well, they are alleged. Even these numbers he said in the call are alleged as false statements. Hundreds of thousands of multiple counted votes, thousands of dead people voting, thousands of people who had moved out of state still voting in Georgia, thousands of people, felons, underage people. And to each of those figures he gave, Raffensperger had specific responses saying, we have looked into that, sir. There are not 10,000 dead people who died. There were two, or, dead people who voted. We found two.
Well, two is also too many as well, right? I mean,
sure. No doubt. I mean, you've seen in our private chats that, there is fraud in every election. There's always going to be fraud. The question is whether there's enough that would actually swing the election. And, certainly whoever filed those ballots for dead people should be prosecuted as well. I don't know if they were found or if they could be, but yeah. So, right. Exactly. There is fraud, and their defense is going to be, we just didn't find enough of it, but it was out there to be found. We were just trying to.
So on this issue, in my simple brain, if I'm trying this case, I'm like, okay, well, a witness for my case is the Secretary of State who's going to speak to this phone conversation. Like, is that what's going to happen? Like, he's going to be hauled into court, subpoenaed or otherwise, and say what the phone call was like?
Yeah, I mean, it's recorded, right? So you don't have to describe it very much. It speaks for itself. But what the charges are from that, not only Trump, giving these allegedly false figures, but the ultimate charge is solicitation of violation of oath of office, right? Saying that this call saying, find me these votes, would be a violation of Raffensperger's oath of office. And he said no. So, it again, is it a petition for redress of grievances going to the official who had the supervision of the election and saying, you can't tell me that this wasn't fraud. In your heart there was fraud. So you have the ability to say there was enough fraud. And that, when I said these categories of charges here, lies, damn lies, and statistics, I think that's what Giuliani and his team was relying on, was that, if we found 5 dead people, there must have been 1,000.
Right.
Or if we find, 1,000 felons, there must have been 5,000.
Right.
And so all of that would add up. You can't possibly admit that there isn't enough of this to sway the election, because it was just 11 or 12,000 votes.
Yeah. All right. So we're recording this on August 23rd. All of these folks have been given until August 24th, I believe, to voluntarily turn themselves in exchange for, I don't know, bail, however it is. Trump has announced that he will do so. Everybody else doing the same thing? Is there going to be any shenanigans going on with that?
There's probably been quite a bit of flurry of activity as we've been recording this. Many of them have already agreed to bond amounts. Some of them, signature bonds that say, if I don't come to court, I will then owe this amount. Trump was actually required to put up the money up front. You can put up 10% with a bonding company, or you can put up the cash. I assume he has the cash, $200,000 liquid that he could put up. But yeah, he said he's going to turn himself in. We'll see a Donald Trump mugshot tomorrow. The other federal defendants, I understand, are making some effort to avoid being booked into the Fulton County Jail. Mark Meadows is appealing to Steve Jones to say, you've already scheduled this hearing for Monday. Part of my motion is that you should just dismiss these charges based on my federal supremacy clause defense. And therefore, if Fani Willis is going to arrest me for not turning in on Friday, when, it's possible that you dismiss the charges on Monday, I shouldn't have to be fingerprinted and mugshotted. It sounds like these folks are being in and out pretty quick, as long as they had their bond agreement in place beforehand, an hour or so processing.
Right.
So,
well, this is, these steps are coming fast and furious, and it's only the momentum will only keep itself going. So I know you'll be following every single day. I will do my best to keep up, although I'm a little slower than you at processing all of it. But I don't know if this becomes a weekly thing, a monthly thing, whatever it is, but let's just keep talking through it, man. I mean, I think that it helps me understand. I'm certainly interested in keeping up with it. I know that people that will be watching this are going to find some value. I told Dana this morning what we're doing. She's like, oh, cool. I'd love to hear kind of an explanation about how all this works. So thanks, man. I appreciate it. I had a good time. Hope you did too. And let's roll it back a few more times.
Absolutely. Whenever. I'm ready.
All right, man. Well, thank you all for listening. And we will come back to you at some point. I'm sure something big's going to happen next little bit. So until then, everybody, thanks for listening again. Tom, you the man. Love you, brother.
You too.